Welcome to The Infinite Jungle, the podcast about the evolution of Ethereum. I'm your host, Christine Kim, VP of Research at Galaxy. On today's show, we have a special guest. We have the CTO and co-founder of Puffer Labs, Jason Vranek, joining us on the show to talk about the liquid restaking dynamics that are happening on Ethereum. It's been a very hot topic, so we'll get into everything about liquid restaking and liquid staking in the second half of the show. But to start off the show, we're going to be talking about a pretty major decision that was made on the most recent Ethereum developer call. Developers agreed to include MaxEB into the next Ethereum upgrade, Electra. So hats off to everybody who vied for this upgrade to get into the next Ethereum upgrade, who vied for MaxEB to get into the next Ethereum upgrade. We've talked about MaxEB on the show before, and my listeners will know how supportive I am of this code change. So we'll talk a little bit about that decision. We'll talk a little bit, give a little bit of a summary for people who are new to the show, just joining. We'll give a precursor on what MaxEB is, and talk a little bit more about what else may or may not go into Electra. So that's the show for you today. Let's start off, though, with a quick disclaimer. I need to remind you to please refer to the disclaimer linked in the podcast show notes and note that none of the information in this podcast constitutes investment advice, an offer, recommendation, or solicitation by Galaxy Digital or any of its affiliates to buy or sell any securities. All right, so yesterday, Ethereum developers agreed to include MaxEB in the Pectra upgrade. Pectra is the combined upgrade name for the upgrade that's coming up. Developers are aiming to try and get that upgrade implemented on Mainnet before the end of the year. And as you know, or as we've talked about in this show before, these upgrade names have many different names. Pectra is the combined name, but the name that you'll also hear that references the same upgrade is Prog, as well as Electra. Prog references the upgrade that is happening on the execution layer of Ethereum, and Electra is the upgrade name that refers to the upgrade happening on the consensus layer. And now those two upgrades are happening at the same time, on the same day. And so to refer to both of those upgrades and just that upgrade in general, we call the upgrade Pectra. This is also what happened with Denkun. Denkun is the combined upgrade names of Deneb and Cancun. There we go. And Denkun was obviously a success. And on the most recent developer call, developers were scoping out what to include in the next Ethereum hard fork. And yesterday's call was focused primarily on the code changes that are going into the consensus layer, the layer of Ethereum that focuses primarily on how validators, the security providers of the network, come to consensus about what blocks are valid, what transactions are valid or not valid. And there are a certain number of code changes that developers have been discussing for the consensus layer for quite a while now. And one of the ones that we talked about on this show already is MaxEB. MaxEB allows validator balances, effective balances, to be greater than 32 ETH. Right now, what that means is that right now, validators have an effective balance of a maximum effective balance of 32 ETH. You can only earn rewards on the effective balance of 32 ETH. If you wanted to earn rewards higher than what you have with your 32 ETH balance, then you'd have to spin up a new validator. And that validator has to have a minimum balance of 32 ETH, and it can only earn rewards on that balance of 32 ETH. If you stake or put in an effective balance of 33 ETH or 34 ETH, you're not going to earn any more rewards than another validator that has an effective balance of 32 ETH. So that's what is the current situation. And because of this, people who own large large amounts of ETH, as well as staking pools who are delegated a lot of ETH from other users, they've had to spin up hundreds and thousands of validators. And this has caused quite a bit of networking load on Ethereum. Every single validator represents a message, a cryptographic signature that needs to be aggregated on the network every single time a block is proposed. And the network continues to progress. It needs to aggregate these signatures, and there's a lot of messages being propagated throughout the network. And this is causing strains on nodes, on the computers that are connecting to Ethereum and verifying the blockchain. And so what MaxEB is trying to do is to reduce the pressures and reduce the increasing amount of networking load on Ethereum by allowing large validators to consolidate their ETH into one validator, as well as create validators with effective balances that are larger than 32 ETH. So you can have validators with an effective balance of up to 2,048 ETH. You can earn rewards on not just 32 ETH, but anywhere in the threshold between 32 and 2,048 ETH, you can earn rewards accordingly across that spectrum. So the more that you stake into your effective balance, the higher rewards that you're going to be able to earn as a validator. And this is expected to greatly shrink the number of validators on Ethereum and thereby improve the health of Ethereum. It's also expected to help at-home independent stakers. Because right now, if you are staking on Ethereum with your 32 ETH and you over time earn 1 ETH and you want to somehow make the rewards that you've earned, put it to use, and have it somehow earn also rewards for you. You don't have to drop that 1 ETH into a staking pool. You can now actually restake it yourself into your validator and start earning compounding rewards that you're earning from your validator instead of going to a pool. So this is expected to also help independent at-home stakers continue to utilize their own software, their own hardware, rather than relying on a pool to try and earn more rewards by pooling together their ETH with other people's ETH. So expected to help network health as well as at-home validators. And it's also expected, this upgrade, to help major large staking operators as well. Managing the keys of thousands of validators is not an easy thing to do, but to be able to consolidate your stakes so that you can wind down certain, say, computers, nodes on which, hundreds of validators are running, so that now you can consolidate those operations into perhaps a single node as opposed to several nodes. It's supposed to simplify staking operations for these large validator node operators. So all in all, a pretty positive upgrade, a code change that I am very, very pleased to hear that is going into Electra. Shout out to everyone who listened to this podcast, but also to all the developers on the call who were fighting for this code change to be included in the Electra upgrade. We did it, woohoo! Pat on the back for all of us folks for getting that through. And now I think a big question, and now that we know that this is going into the upgrade, validator node operators, particularly major staking pools like Lido, Rocket Pool, any other infrastructure providers that are running hardware needs to now prepare for this code change. This is going to be probably the biggest change to validator dynamics since the Shanghai upgrade, which implemented staked ETH withdrawals. And so now, validator node operators at home, independent node operators, and even large ones, they're going to have to prepare for this upgrade. They're going to have to think, to what extent do I consolidate my validators, and where do I put my balance, my effective balance threshold? Do I want to be earning, rewards on 50 ETH as opposed as opposed to say 40 ETH, or do I want to take some rewards off the table? These are questions in which the operations of running your validator, these are questions that validator node operators are going to have to answer in the months to come as we prepare for this upgrade. So to what extent do I consolidate the validators under my control? And once they're consolidated, where do I set that effective balance threshold? Do I set it at the full amount? Am I staking and locking in my ETH, all 64 ETH that I own, or will I put that effective balance at say 50 and then do something else with the remaining ETH that I have, put it into decentralized finance, or I don't know, buy an NFT with it. So these are questions that validator node operators will now have to think about. The other major code change that developers are still grappling with, whether or not to include it in Electra, is the inclusion lists. We've also talked about inclusion lists on this show, and as listeners who have been following along will know, I'm not a huge fan of inclusion lists. I talked about inclusion lists quite a bit with a previous guest on this show, Ethereum core developer Terrence Zhao, who's working on the Prism client. And one of the key assumptions of inclusion lists is that the censoring activity that's happening on Ethereum by builders and relays is a much greater problem and issue than, say, the censoring activity that is happening by validator node operators. So to give a little bit of background, the majority of blocks being built on Ethereum are not built by validators, who are the security providers of Ethereum. They're built by these third-party entities that are extremely specialized in packaging blocks with the most valuable transactions in the most valuable, lucrative transaction order as possible. And because this is a very highly specialized activity, these builders, there are not many builders, let's say, that can do this job well and compete in the builder market. There's a high number of builders. The majority of builders are intentionally censoring transactions out of blocks for regulatory reasons. Most of the transactions that are being censored are transactions that interact with OFAC-sanctioned addresses. Ethereum, as a decentralized permissionless protocol, is meant to be censorship resistant. So the fact that the majority of blocks on Ethereum are being built in such a way where these blocks there are transactions intentionally being censored out of them is not a good thing. Validators, the Ethereum community, I should say, as a whole, is trying to make Ethereum more resilient as a censorship-resistant blockchain by one of the ways is through this thing called inclusion lists, which would put the onus on validators to create a list of transactions that the builder must include in their block. So this inclusion list is a list of transactions that a validator creates and passes to the builder, and the builder has to include these transactions in order for their block to be considered valid. And there are different designs for this. There is a way where the validator just sends that list directly to the builder, or the validator sends that list to the next validator who's about to propose a block, and then the builder for the next block actually has to include that inclusion list. For the details around how these inclusion list design works, I point you guys to the interview that I had with Terrence Zhao. He explains it in quite a bit of detail. This code change is still being considered by developers. And one of the primary reasons that I am not as supportive of inclusion lists is because I don't think that validators are more likely not to censor transactions than builders. I think validators themselves many validators are operated by professional entities, regulated entities that, like builders, would prefer to censor transactions than not censor them. So I don't think that inclusion lists will really have that large of an impact on the censoring activity happening on Ethereum. And I think there may be other solutions for improving Ethereum censorship resistance that may be more effective or have the same impact as inclusion lists, but not actually touch the Ethereum protocol or / change the Ethereum protocol. So honestly, my views have not changed that much on inclusion lists, but for my so that my listeners are aware, this is being seriously considered for the Electra upgrade, and developers will probably try and make a final decision on whether or not it goes in or out in the next 1 to 4 weeks. So yeah, so those are the two biggest code changes that I would say developers talked about. Next week we'll probably get more of an update on what developers are considering for the execution layer side of the Pectra upgrade, for the Prague upgrade. There's quite a bit of changes that developers are considering that will impact the application layer of Ethereum, smart contract developers on Ethereum, and the execution machine, the execution engine of Ethereum. So we can look forward to that for next week's call. And now we are going to be chatting with Jason Vranek, the co-founder and CTO of Puffer Labs. We are going to be talking about the liquid restaking rewards that are happening on Ethereum right now. I will note, even though restaking is not actually yet possible on Ethereum. There is no restaking protocol to really restake to, or really have real restaking yield. There is no restaking yield. But anyways, these liquid restaking protocols still exist now, and they are a major hot topic. So we're going to talk about this dynamic, and we're going to talk about what's really going on behind the scenes with liquid restaking with Jason. So let's go chat with Jason now. Welcome back to the show, you guys. I have with me Jason Vranek, the co-founder and CTO of Puffer Labs, one of the top liquid restaking protocols on Ethereum. So excited to have you on the show, Jason.
Thank you so much, Christine. Actually, my very first podcast, so excited to be Jungle Pod.
Oh my gosh, amazing! That's great. That's very exciting. I feel honored that this will be the first podcast where you're featured, and I want to get into all the things that Puffer Labs is doing, especially as it relates to liquid restaking. Liquid restaking is such a hot topic nowadays in the Ethereum ecosystem. So maybe to start off for our listeners, can you give a overview of how Puffer works? Obviously, every liquid restaking protocol will have, differences in the way that it functions. But can you give kind of an overview of when a user stakes their ETH or their liquid staking token, like stETH, what happens after that? What are the next steps following?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll preface that with the point that we're going for with Puffer was to improve the viability of home stakers. And so in building that, we built a native liquid restaking protocol. So that means validators, ETH is and this is in contrast to LST restaking, where you take STETH or some other LST and delegate that to an operator. For native restaking, because the validators are really involved in the process, they're going to be sharing in some of the revenue generated from these AVSs. So from the user's point of view, they would take their ETH, deposit it into Puffer. This would be pooled and allocated to our set of permissionless validators. So I can dive into some of the technical details later, but we worked on really bringing down the bond requirements so that you only need one ETH to run the validator. From there, you can kind of think of this like a rocket fuel style permissionless liquid staking protocol at the bottom, and more of this permission set of operators that run the actual restaking activities. And our goal is to make that top layer permissionless in the future. A lot of this really depends on how slashing evolves in the eigenlayer ecosystem. So what happens is your ETH gets allocated to one of these, we call them no-ops or node operators. They run a validator, and the validator's ETH is then restaked and delegated to one of these permissioned operators. And they'll be running these myriad of AVM and generating the restaking rewards. And these rewards will all trickle back down to the Puff LRT holders.
Gotcha. So when a user stakes their ETH and delegates it to a node operator in the Puffer Finance ecosystem. I too, when I first heard about Puffer, I heard about it as a liquid staking protocol, as this protocol where it introduces these novel technologies where the validator set can have a very low probability of slashing, and users can very permissionlessly delegate their ETH to this validator set because of the technology that Puffer enables, which is, I think, secure. Is it the secure
signer?
The SS
secure signer. Yeah.
Secure signer. Yeah. The secure signer technology. This new layer, though, of now the node operators redelegating to other node operators that are restaking, that part of the equation I need a little bit more detail on. So these validator node operators, I'm under the impression that they can now also run software, run clients that will secure eigenlayer AVSs, secure other protocols, and thereby earn greater rewards. But doesn't that require additional kind of permissions, additional hoops that you have to jump through in order to be considered for the eigenlayer validator set? Can you talk a little bit more about the process in which Puffer node operators, what they have to do in order to actually get restaking rewards? Because initially I completely understood kind of the dynamic between users and validators. It's very similar to why you would put your ETH into, say, a Lido or a Rocket Pool. But of course, the advantage with Puffer is that it's permissionless, but you can have a lower staked collateral requirement for the validators. But this additional layer where the node operators of Puffer are now engaging with the eigenlayer protocol, the restaking protocol, can you talk about how that happened and how that works?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think maybe it's worth starting a little bit backwards, like at the beginning of kind of what we were targeting here. And that was, of course, like we wanted to make it more accessible to run these validators. Kind of Rocket Pool paved the way here. But we are trying to target a more capital efficient protocol. And so this is where we started working with Justin Drake and built what became Secure Signer. So this is the hardware-based anti-slasher. And this allows you to essentially bring down the bond requirement significantly. But it was just like one of kind of multiple challenges in trying to build this permissionlessly. And arguably, kind of there's a handful of these EIPs that we're all kind of excited for as protocol developers. One of them is 4788, which is going to make reporting a lot of things more trustless. You can use ZKPs to do that now. But beyond that, there's EIP 7002 to allow for us to kind of eject validators without requiring custody. And of course, BLS precompile. So given that though, like we saw that there are these sort of trends towards centralization in the liquid staking market, and built this kind of proactively, like knowing that we might not get 7002 for a while, and this is looking back about a year and a half now. And so we had to add this thing called the Guardians, which are essentially a security council with some of this extra trusted execution environments to kind of reduce the trust dependencies there. And so now we're able to get around, think of this as training wheels until 7002 comes out, and we can deprecate this as well. Another one I think less talked about is on BLS precompiles, which is another way to allow for like trustless registrations of validators. That starts to get really scary when 32 ETH can kind of get sent into a black hole that you can't ever get back.
And BLS precompiles are also going into the next upgrade.
Perfect.
It's been a while, but I'm telling you, 7002 and BLS. And then we already have the EVM, the beacon root exposing the EVM with the Denkun upgrade. So we're making progress. It takes a long time, but anyway.
Well, absolutely. Yeah, no, definitely love that. I think we've always tried to view ourselves as trying to be kind of like these out of protocol agents that are trying to make things sort of pave the way while we're waiting for these enshrined solutions. So yeah, so maybe just to zoom back out now. So like we tried to build these things to make it easier to run validators, like lower bond requirement. There was a whole other thing which maybe I could talk about later on incentives and like how do we deal with what Justin had termed rug pooling, where validators are incentivized to steal EV from the pool. What this becomes more and more likely as your bond requirement lowers. But essentially, we built this thing and we're like, okay, we made it simpler or cheaper to run a validator, but the profit margins are still pretty low. And so to justify like running all the hardware, a lot of people are going to end up having to stack multiple validators on the same like server. This essentially brings back up the capital requirement that we are trying to lower, sort of defeating the purpose. Like I think we were naive at the beginning, thinking like let's just lower this bond, make it for the people, and the people will come. But really, we need to incentivize it a little more, and that's really where this collaboration with Freedom and Eigenlayer started, where we're looking into alternative revenue streams to help kind of subsidize these validators. And so this is where the native free staking side of it comes in. But now to your question on like sort of what is the dynamics of the restaking. So definitely we're still in the wild west here in terms of like Eigenlayer protocol being very in this nation state. Like there's a lot of maybe features that will eventually be added. But one of the things now is like on slashing is considered like all or nothing slashing. So it becomes very difficult to allow for kind of this untrusted set of validators to engage in restaking when in one action it could get slashed 32 ETH, whereas in proof of stake, it's pretty hard to slash 32 ETH unless you control like the majority of 33% of the validators. So with that limitation in mind is why we've kind of added this layer of delegation right now. So what happens if I'm a validator on Puffer? I'm delegating my validators 32 to one of these more reputable operators. And of course, like part of the point of Puffer at the beginning was we don't want to rely on reputation, we want to rely on economic security. And we're moving in that direction. We're going to add more anti-slashers for these AVSs, but we're still in those early phases where we need to take baby steps. But what this results in is just by running a validator within the Puffer ecosystem, you're earning your normal proof of stake rewards, but also you're getting exposure to these restaking rewards without actually having to run the additional like AVS requirements.
So technically speaking, the node operator still runs the consensus layer, the execution layer, the MEV boost. Like they run the node to get staking rewards from Ethereum, and then they also have a mechanism through which they can restake to a eigenlayer node operator, and that node operator runs the software for whatever protocol that they're trying to secure. And any rewards that they earn from these other protocols, namely EigenDA is probably going to be the first AVS, which you can earn restaking rewards from. Those rewards then accrue back to the node operator, the Puffer node operator, and then that trickles back down to the user. Is that right?
Exactly.
And the kinds of rewards that you get from the AVS, from connecting to the eigenlayer restaker, are those rewards though denominated in ETH? I was under the impression that it would probably be in a different token. How do rewards then kind of get calculated back to the user in their Puff ETH?
Yeah, definitely good question, and something that I think all of us are kind of working in different directions towards and kind of going with the information that we have. So I have heard before that EigenDA would pay out in ETH, which makes our lives easier as a native free staking protocol. But I don't know, maybe they'll pay us in points, maybe some future token. It's sort of unclear on that front, but I think if we look towards maybe not just IKD, but towards other ABSs, there is this trend towards um, like paying out native token. And so there's this concept in the future of dual token staking, where an ABS can require the operator to put down like beacon chain ETH plus their own token. Um, in the future, right now, it's only just whatever collateral is accepted from Eigenlayer, so an LST or beacon chain ETH, but the rewards would be paid out in tokens. And I think like kind of the point of Eigenlayer in their white paper was like we don't really need these native tokens to secure these ABSs, but it still is useful from like I guess their point of view for bootstrapping their protocol to have their own native token for governance, things like that. You can pay us in the token, and I think part of the thesis is well, borrow the security from like Ethereum validators, allow your protocol to grow in value to the point where you can start using your own token as this dual security.
Okay, that makes sense. I mean, to be determined. Maybe cross that bridge once we get there. In terms of if these AVSs start paying out in other tokens, maybe they don't have to, based on the kind of rationale that you just explained. The other major question around this, though, is also the unknown around yields. The main impetus for why we're adding restaking to Puffer is because it's not enough to incentivize users to use this permissionless protocol. Even when you lower the collateral requirement from 16 ETH to like 1 ETH, it's still not enough for people to really choose Puffer. And the rewards for the Ethereum staking protocol naturally accrue to the largest staker, and that's Lido. Lido doesn't have any collateral requirements. It's also got the highest amount of liquidity. So as a liquid staking token, your token has the snowball effect. The more liquidity it has, the more users it draws, the larger it becomes, the more staking rewards it accrues because it's running more validators, probability-wise getting more block proposals. And trying to compete in this market as Puffer, you're looking towards, Eigenlayer, restaking to get more yield, looking to points. But I'm curious to know from your perspective, it's a question as to whether or not the yield from restaking in Eigenlayer will really be enough. And we haven't really gotten into points yet, but like, are these incentives really enough to be sustainable, to offer sustainable demand for Puffer? Because from my point of view, there's just so many unknowns in these new kind of attractive solutions that you guys are looking at.
Totally. Yeah, I think this is another one of those open questions in the industry. Like maybe what are the ABSs that are going to be producing like the most yield? And of course, this is always a game of like most yield, least risk. And definitely on that point though, like we want to focus on like the ABSs that have this endogenous risk is how Shriram always puts it. Like the slashing has to be kind of in your own hands and not dependent on some other variable like the price of ETH. Because like sure you can have AVSs built like that and they might have a lot of yields, but very risky for the LRT. So if you're doing the native staking, it starts to become very risky for just Ethereum in general. If sort of the fate of a lot of values depends on um, like the slashing condition of some sketchy AVS. Um, but in terms of the yields, like we're really trying to focus on like more fundamentally, like what are some of these different categories that are going to be revenue generating. And I guess maybe I think people have different numbers in their head. Like I don't really see the yield as being like substantially like, or let's just say like on the order of magnitude of just normal validator yield, because that's all denominated in ETH. ETH is the largest network. To generate something with as much revenue, like you would need a equally large kind of protocol to secure. But I do think that like starting to squeeze out some of these smaller margins is really going to help differentiate some of these protocols from like the existing like Lidos, who are just purely LST.
Do you have numbers in mind by chance? So like 4%, let's just assume that 3 to 4% is what you would get from consensus layer rewards on Ethereum. And let's just say you tack on maybe another like 1% from MEV and priority fees. How much more are we talking in terms of margins from restaking and points?
So optimistically, I would say 0.5% would be something that we would be happy with. I think, of course, this number is just constantly getting diluted as the size of eigenlayers TPL just grows and grows. We need to have more and more profitable ABSs coming to the market as well. But I'd say 0.5% would be great.
On the topic of differentiation as well, though, between Puffer as a now a liquid restaking protocol and others, one of the differentiating factors between Puffer as a liquid staking protocol was its permissionless and as maximally permissionless and decentralized as possible. But introducing this permissioned operator set from restaking now I think does kind of dilute the brand and the differentiation between Puffer and other liquid restaking protocols. Can you talk a little bit more about that value and how you expect Puffer to compete against other liquid restaking protocols? There's quite a few now. I think the largest liquid restaking protocol is a protocol called EtherFi. And I'd love to get your views about the competitive dynamics between how this all plays out. I'm under the impression that Puffer has been one of those protocols that really tries to differentiate itself by not relying on permission sets, but given that the nascency of the eigenlayer protocol now requires a permissioned operator set, you guys kind of have your hands tied. How are you guys thinking about differentiation in this LRT liquid restaking competitive landscape?
Totally. Yeah. So I think maybe I'll explain like kind of the short-term differentiator, but also just to your point on like this. Yeah, this is always definitely a hard decision from the team to have to move in that direction. But version 2, what we're going to be focusing on is kind of at the expense of capital efficiency. You can add like a higher bond requirement back into the mix to allow them, like your average home staker, to participate in the restaking. We'll get there. I think kind of just the big limitation on that is, let's just say it was completely permissionless today. There's a hard limit for a lot of these ABSs, like EigenDA in particular, can only support an operator set of around 200. So even though like the technology is built to be horizontally scaling and would in the future cater to that home staker that wants that extra yield from EigenDA, we're kind of still on the roadmap to get there. And this requires some extra like ZKP to aggregate a lot of these signatures, but it's BLS aggregation on the smart contract level that's really limiting this capacity. So we'll get there. But maybe rewind a bit about on like how is Puffer really differentiating from the other LRTs? And I think really it comes down to this permissionless nature. So of having the base layer of validators as permissionless. So maybe just I'll walk you through like kind of the strawman example of like what's bad if you don't do that. Well, like if you decide, okay, I'm going to spin up a liquid restaking protocol. I'm going to get to market quickly, so I'm just going to run all the validators through some professional operator, and then I'm going to have them also go and run all of the ABSs as well. We start to get into this one that's just like very centralized, kind of just going back to the old arguments of like Rocket Pool versus Lido. But in the sort of eigenlayer space, now we've created this vendor lock-in problem where, let's say, I don't really like this operator and I want someone better to run the ABSs for me. Now it requires me exiting from eigenlayer and then having them exit all of their validators and then kind of re-enter. And this really creates a lot of friction and also just builds this kind of fragile protocol. So kind of the difference in Puffer is the base layer is entirely permissionless, decentralized. It's just like the people that you're delegating to are permissioned for now. And it's easy now from the protocol's point of view to say, hey, operator A, you're underperforming. You, yeah, like we want to replace you. We can do that by simply replacing the operator, and we can, because we've decoupled the validator set. So that kind of makes it more flexible in terms of like in the future when we're talking about rebalancing, like the protocol's AVS obligations, things like that.
And how simple is it in practice? Or I guess this is probably something that we'll have to find out. But in the early stages of when Eigenlayer launches, I'd be curious to know how easy it is to swap out operators for an AVS like EigenDA, maybe preliminary AVSs. I wonder how many operators there might be to choose from, how centralized, decentralized they are, how permissioned they are. I believe that the node operators for Eigenlayer are all permissioned, that they themselves go through a vetting program in Eigenlayer, that that Eigenlayer will start off with a permissioned. Do correct me if I'm wrong, but will all be permissioned node operators, all highly vetted, and now Puffer is selecting from that selected pool. I wonder, how those dynamics will kind of play out. But I guess really only time will tell, given that so many of these features and these milestones have still yet to be reached, of like even getting to the final node operator set for Eigenlayer, and then having Puffer start to build the rails to connect to these operators.
Yeah, maybe just a slight clarification. So definitely the AVSs are more on the permission side. Like I think EigenDA, and then there's going to be a handful that roll out kind of slowly over the course of the year. And that's mainly in place because that's where most of the slashing, like the would happen. Like because it's a permissionless platform, like this is the risk is someone can go spin up an AVS with an arbitrary slashing condition, and just if people aren't vetting that carefully, they go join, get slashed. And this especially becomes worse when we're talking about attributable slashing, where the money that was like slashed goes to the victim. And if you're spinning up like a AVS and there's like a backdoor or something and you make yourself the victim, that's the easy way to drain these protocols. So definitely the AVS side is rolling out permissions, but I think the operators are completely open. It's just becomes like a capital problem now. And this goes back to that limit of around 200 operators. Probably the 200 with the most stake weight will be the ones in the set.
Gotcha. And just to confirm, the 200 operators per AVS, right?
Yes. And I mean, also, this is just for EigenDA specific case. Like, I can maybe do an ADS where I do the BLS aggregation on an L2 and I can have much more. But I think because EigenDA is so foundational, it needs to be on the L1.
Gotcha. Well, this has been really fascinating talking with you through the dynamics of how Puffer is thinking about restaking, how Puffer is thinking about competing in the liquid restaking arena. As a final question, could you go through kind of the timeline for all of this to happen? Because so much of what we're talking about has yet to really even happen. Eigenlayer is not really fully launched. There are no AVSs. There is no EigenDA. There is no restaking rewards. I believe Puffer has not yet launched on mainnet either. So this workflow of a user, being able to put their ETH into a pool of permissionless node operators and then have those node operators then delegate to a Eigenlayer node operator. Like, when is all of this going to happen, and in what stages? Can you give us a sense of timeline and of the progression through which all of this will start to happen? And I will note, on Twitter, it sounds like all of this is already happening, but it's not.
Totally. Yeah, I'll try and give you some as accurate estimates as I can. So maybe starting with Puffer. what's been going on with us has been our pre-mainnet deposit campaign. So our mainnet protocol is entering like the auditing phase. We're getting ready to launch that on mainnet in the next, hopefully towards late April would be our goal. And then anyone can go and participate, run a validator. But right now,
so mainnet late April. Mainnet late April
is the goal. Yeah, and so what we've been doing so far has been accepting ETH deposits, and like part of our goal initially with Puffer was kind of thinking of us as trying to give some decentralization runway to the Ethereum core developers to roll out things like execution tickets, all these things that can help kind of keep things decentralized. And so part of that has been like, how can we reduce some of Lido's dominance on the market, keep them under this 33% threshold? And I think we're so happy that a lot of people have been supporting this. And right now, like when we go to this mainnet phase, we're going to start redeeming a lot of this ETH from Lido. And it should, I think the last time I checked, bring them down from around 33% to 32%. So we have about 1% of the, there's
1% of Lido's ETH is with Puffer. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I think it's more like 3 or 4% of Lido's ETH, but 1% of the validator set.
1% of the validator set, and 3 to 4% of Lido's. So you'll redeem all of that for Puffer, for ETH, for stake, like native staked ETH.
Yeah, so that'll turn into native ETH and fund all the permissionless validators.
That's great. That's congratulations. You are slowly but surely making a very tiny dent into Lido's dominance.
Yep, that was the goal. So yeah, then moving on in the mainnet time, we're going to start that whole process. And yeah, EigenLayer, I've heard things like in the next month or 2 months, EigenDA will go live. And then from there, it's just a lot of different like roadmaps. So I've kind of viewed like the EigenLayer roadmap as, and this is from my own words, not from their team or anything, but like stage 1 has been about building up this foundational security, a lot of the TVL to provide to these ABSs. The next iteration for mainnet is going to be delegations and actually running ABSs, starting with EigenDA. Because like right now on mainnet, if you have like an eigenpod sitting there, you can't actually engage in restaking. It just is sitting there waiting for it. Once this next mainnet update comes out, we'll be able to start delegating to these operators. Then the next stage, I think, is focusing more on incentives. So, and M2 is like the name of their like mainnet 2 for eigenpods. That's what's coming out next. There's no slashing there. So a lot of these ABSs are going to be getting probably a lot of security from these LRTs because there is no slashing risk. But then in M3, they're going to add both payments and slashing, so incentivize and disincentivize the operators. And then kind of, I think, attributable slashing hopefully is like in one of those, either in the M3 upgrade or possibly after that one.
That's a lot of stages. This sounds like a multi-year roadmap. This does not sound like a 2024 stage thing. However, it sounds like at the very least, Puffer is going to be delivering on a quicker timeline, kind of at least the liquid staking part, and putting a dent into Lido's dominance in the next couple months, and then as EigenLayer launches, start to add in the restaking part. It's fascinating to hear also that EigenLayer in its M2 and M3 will slowly start to roll out its incentives and its penalties like slashing and also its rewards and kind of toggle with that iteratively. Makes sense because this is a very that comes with a lot of risks and an additional layer of complexity. Well, thank you so much, Jason, for sharing with me all of this insight around the liquid restaking space, and also sharing with me what Puffer's been up to. It's been really fascinating to hear about this. Thank you so much for joining the show.
So yeah, thanks so much for having me, Christine.
This is it for the Infinite Jungle episode this week. Thank you to everyone also for listening to the show. Please be sure to tune in again next week for a new episode. Please do also like and subscribe to the show if you haven't already. And I will chat with all of you again next week. Bye, guys.